She was standing on a wagon like an old mule, her head covered with a sack, feet bleeding into the wood, and her hands tied in front of her like a prisoner, and they were bidding on her as if it were a game. $2, the fat man shouted, laughter thick in his throat. A real savage. Yours forever. The crowd laughed along, old men with sunburned necks and whiskey breath. Young punks with dust in their boots and no soul in their eyes. Silas Cole stood at the edge of that crowd, his heart pounding like a war drum. He'd seen darkness before in battlefields, in the eyes of dying men. But this was worse. This was cruelty with an audience. He should have walked away. That's what men like him do. Keep their heads down and let the world rot. Then the girl stumbled once, her knees buckling from shame, and that was it. $20, Silas said loudly, his voice flat. The crowd went silent, as if slapped all at once. The seller's eyes widened. Then he smirked and spat mockingly. Silas pushed through the crowd, climbed onto the wagon, cut the ropes, and lifted the sack. He expected a girl, a victim, a hollow thing. What he saw was defiance. Eyes like embers, shoulders squared. Not afraid, not broken. That look would follow him the rest of his life. He didn't know her name or her story, but the moment he touched that rope, he knew he'd bought more than a woman. He'd bought a war he wasn't ready for. Silas rode home without a word. Not to be mysterious, he simply didn't know what to say. He had lived alone for 8 years, ever since Lillian passed. He had grown used to the quiet. Some days he even preferred it. But now he had company, and not just any kind. A woman who hadn't spoken since he freed her, who didn't cry, didn't thank him, didn't flinch. She just walked barefoot behind his horse, as if it were nothing. Every few miles he'd glance back, worried she would collapse, but she kept walking, her steps strangely steady and determined. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was low. The place seemed smaller than usual, almost ashamed of itself. Silas pointed to the small barn. You can stay there. There's a water trough nearby. She gave no sign she'd heard, just nodded slightly and walked straight in, as if she had known the place all along. That night he couldn't sleep. The silence wasn't the same anymore. It had a pulse now, a presence. The sound of the wind outside, the rustle of dry grass, all seemed to mix with the breathing of another person. The next morning, he left food and coffee on the porch. He didn't see her take it, but by noon, the plate was empty. For 3 days, neither spoke, but things began to shift. One morning, he found the gate latch fixed better than he ever had done it. Another day, his torn shirt was neatly sewn like new. He started to see traces of her everywhere. Stones stacked neatly, firewood piled more orderly. He started talking not to her, really just aloud. About the cattle, the weather, the dull ache in his back. No answers came, but she listened. He could feel it. The silence between them was no longer empty. It had become warm and meaningful. Then came the storm. A big one. Black clouds rolled in fast, the wind like a freight train. Silas ran to the barn to herd the cattle inside, and saw her standing in the doorway, watching the sky like it was an old enemy. He yelled, "Get inside!" But she didn't move. Not until lightning cracked hard and close. He ran back, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into the cabin, slamming the door behind them. They stood there, soaked to the bone, hearts pounding. That's when he saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. The storm didn't scare him, but that look did, because for the first time she wasn't just surviving. She was human, vulnerable. After that stormy night, something shifted. Not with words, not with promises, but with small gestures. Every morning, Silas left coffee and cornbread on the porch. He didn't see her take it, but by mid-morning, it was gone. She started sitting on the edge of the porch steps, not close, but not hiding anymore either. He learned her name not from her lips, but from a drawing in the dust. One morning, he found an old saddle he thought lost weeks ago, placed neatly on the porch rail. Next to it, drawn softly in the dirt, was a wildflower. That night, he pulled out one of Lillian's old botany books, page 52. There it was, Marisol, a flower, meaning eternal bloom in the local native tongue. The next morning he said it softly as he set the plate down. Marisol. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him, but from that day on he kept saying it. Each time her eyes lingered a little longer. A few days later she said his name. Silas. One word. Quiet. Steady. It stopped him cold. After years of silence, his name sounded like music in someone else's voice. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. They began fixing the ranch together, her silent touch in the kitchen, his steady hands on the land. He read to her in the evenings, fumbling through faded pages by firelight. Sometimes she'd smile when he mispronounced a word. They were building something slow, honest, enduring. One quiet evening, as he sharpened a hoe by the barn, Marisol walked over and gently placed her hand on his. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man just surviving. And if he had known what was coming, he might have sharpened a rifle instead of a hoe. But that's the funny thing about peace, you never realize how much you needed it until it's about to be taken away. If you followed this far, maybe, just maybe, you're the kind of soul who still believes in stories like theirs. And if that's true, stick around. There's more the West has to tell. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when folks have nothing better to do. Back in Red Hollow, whispers about Silas and Marisol had grown into full-blown stories. Some called it scandalous, others a joke. But Tobias Crane, he took it as a personal insult. You see, Tobias was the one who had dragged Marisol into town in the first place. He thought he'd sell her quick, have a drink, and move on. Instead, some quiet widower made him look like a fool in front of everyone. Every time someone mentioned Silas's name, it was followed by snickers. Tobias's pride was raw, and when a man like that gets embarrassed, he doesn't forget. He waits. He stews until he's ready to make a mess. One dusty afternoon, Silas spotted a cloud on the horizon, not a rain cloud, but a dust cloud kicked up by horses, 4 riders coming fast. He sat on the fence post he was fixing. Marisol, he called calmly. Go inside. Lock the door. She looked up from her garden, saw the dust, and without a word slipped into the cabin. The riders didn't slow. They came bold, loud, half-drunk, Tobias leading the way. After noon, he spat the name like a curse. Heard you've been playing house with stolen goods. Silas didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. She's not stolen, he said. She's my wife. The words carried weight. Not a legal truth maybe, but a heart, deep one. Tobias laughed, ugly and sharp. You think that changes anything? She belongs to the town. We paid for her once. We'll take her back now. He dismounted, a hand on his belt as if reaching for something. Silas's rifle was already in his hands, calm, steady. She's not going anywhere, he said, eyes locked on Tobias. You can leave or you can find out how serious I am. For a long moment, only the wind moved through the grass. Then the cabin door creaked open. Marisol stepped out not with a weapon, but wearing the blue calico shawl Silas had left for her. She walked to his side, her head held high. In that moment, she didn't need to say a thing. She was already home. For a long moment, no one moved. Silas stood steady, rifle in hand. Marisol stood beside him. No gun, no threat, just presence, somehow louder than any bullet. Tobias looked between them, saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not confusion. He saw a man and a woman who had already survived too much to be shaken by men like him. He muttered something under his breath and backed up. The others didn't argue. They weren't there for a fight. They were there to scare. And they had failed. By the time their dust settled over the horizon, Silas hadn't even lowered his rifle. He simply turned to Marisol and nodded. That night they didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The danger was gone. But something else had settled in. Peace. Not the kind that sneaks in quietly and leaves just as fast, the kind you earn, the kind you fight for. And it stayed through the seasons. The ranch changed. So did they. Marisol's garden grew wild and beautiful. Silas's hands grew rougher, steadier. They built something together. Not out of what they'd lost, but from what they chose to keep. Love, maybe, but more than that, trust. And that, my friend, is what the West was always really about. Not the gunfights or the saloons, not the gold or the cattle, but the grit it takes to stay, to rebuild when life burns it all down, to love again, even when it scares you. Now maybe you're reading this and thinking about your own battles. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've faced your own Tobias Crane along the way. Let me ask you this. What did you stand for when it got hard? What kept you from giving up? And who stood beside you?